Michael Kennedy is here to tell us about how he resigned from his job over Canada's human rights laws, one in particular that protects your right to not have hurt feelings, right, Michael? So, this is a case we talked about a few weeks back, but we had the holidays and everything, and I'm rested wearing my tie dye sweatshirt from Florida. You're
Yeah.
looking great. You're feeling better. I know you were sick for a little bit. So,
Yeah.
tell us. I know this is a kind of a convoluted story. So everybody just be patient, stick with Michael, because first you're going to go, wait, that's really a law in Canada. And then you're going to say, wait, what happened? So stick with him. Okay, I'm going to make you big here, Michael. Take it away. Tell us exactly what happened to you recently.
Yeah. So in Canada, we have these human rights acts. There's a federal human rights act, and there are provincial human rights acts. And these acts house all of our discrimination and harassment laws. That was originally why they were created. But they also include additional rights that you wouldn't see in the US discrimination and harassment laws, which includes this notion that there's a human right to be free from having your feelings hurt. And in Canada, if you can argue that somebody hurt your feelings by saying something or not saying something or doing something that hurts your feelings, if it's on one of those protected enumerated grounds of discrimination and harassment, then you have grounds to take them to a human rights tribunal, which adjudicates these laws and argue that you're entitled to compensation from this individual because they hurt your feelings. So that's one of the problematic elements of Canada's human rights acts. And the Justice Centre, where I was working for 8 years, was staunchly opposed to these laws. And they had spoken out numerous times. They had taken cases that were opposed to these laws. They were speaking out against these laws, and they were telling their donors that they were against these laws, and the public that they were against these laws. And this is something that I fundamentally believed when I signed up for the Justice Centre, and it was a core value of mine that I thought was also a core value of the organization that I was choosing to work for and choosing to lend my skills and my time to. And so for me, this was a fundamental issue at the Justice Centre, the idea that there is no right to be compensated because your feelings were hurt. And when Justin Trudeau came into power in 2015, he added gender identity and expression to those laws, to the Human Rights Acts. And so now people had a right to be compensated for hurt feelings on the grounds that their chosen pronouns were not affirmed by another person. And that person can be tried under these human rights laws and these human rights tribunals to give compensation because of the fact that they refuse to affirm your chosen gender identity. The Justice Centre, as soon as those laws were proposed, was speaking out against them. And we even went to Parliament to advocate against those laws at the committee stage. And when we were advocating for those laws, we were talking about how important it is to recognize that nobody has a right to go through their life not having their feelings hurt. And it's unfair to expect other Canadians to pay up to $10,000 each time they offend somebody's feelings. And this was a long-standing position of the Justice Centre. And when they decided to take on a case involving a 7-year-old girl who was told by her teachers that girls and boys are not real, they decided to take a 180 on their former stance and now say, at least for this cisgendered girl in this context, she does have a right to have her gender identity affirmed. And the teacher failed to uphold that. And now the teacher and the school have to pay compensation as a result of that. So go ahead.
Can I stop you real fast? Can you say a little bit more about exactly what happened in that case?
Yeah. So this is called, I think it's been abbreviated to protect the identities of the families, but it's a case involving the Ottawa Carleton School Board in Canada. The case, I think, began in 2018, perhaps 2019, when a 7-year-old girl was in class and the teacher was doing an instruction on gender identity and expression, which in Ontario is part of the public school curriculum. And this teacher was showing a video, I think I shared it with you previously, where they're talking about how there's this spectrum of genders. There's like 32 genders, and there's no male and female, according to this video and according to the people behind these videos. There's no male and female anymore. It's now this spectrum, this fluid spectrum. And so this 7-year-old girl said to her teacher, well, I identify as a girl. And the teacher said, allegedly, and actually, I think in documents that the school board has filed, they've admitted that the teacher did say this, that girls, that's not true. Girls and boys are not real. And this had a very negative impact on this little girl's well-being, her emotional health, her mental health. And I want to be clear, as I was with my colleagues at the Justice Center at the time that I left, that I think that what this teacher did to this girl is absolutely wrong. It's despicable. It's extremely damaging to that little girl's sense of confidence and sense of self. But there is no just way for the Justice Center to get involved in that kind of case. Just like there are so many injustices that happen in the world that the Justice Center doesn't get involved in, because we have a very specific mandate, which is to protect the individual charter rights of Canadians. And this is not an individual charter right. And the damage that the Justice Center will do by attempting to set another precedent in favor of this very damaging and unjust law is to set another precedent that reinforces this idea that A, Canadians have a right to be compensated for hurt feelings, and B, that Canadians have a right to expect other people to affirm their chosen pronouns, both of which the Justice Center has historically stood against.
So why do you think in this particular case they took on the case?
Well, I can really only go on what they told me, which is when I was discussing why they had decided to take on this case, they told me that they considered this to be one of the most important issues of our time, if not the most important issue of our time. And I fundamentally disagree with that. I think that there are plenty of issues that are more important than this one. Not to say that not to minimize the effect that this teacher's actions had on this girl. But to say that in terms of the Justice Center's mission and mandate and scope, this is outside of our wheelhouse. And their position was that this was too important not to take on, and mission be damned.
Because they were more concerned about the fluidity of gender being taught in the schools than they were about this hurt feelings law. Is that what you're saying when they're talking about this is the issue of our time? Is that what it is, that that we're taking away gender?
That's right. The gender issue was the issue of our time. That's what they were saying to me. And if you look at the Justice Center's published columns from, say, 2015 to 2018, if you look at the caseloads, look at the percentage of cases that we were taking on from 2015 to 2019 that addressed the transgender issue in some way. And in those cases, it was always just action by the Justice Center defending individual charter rights against overreach by governments who were attempting to interpret these new gender identity and expression laws and enforce them, and were violating individual freedoms in doing so. And so the Justice Center rightly had a role to play in those cases. We were defending against a human rights complaint that was filed against waxing salons in Vancouver, and this was it got a lot of play in the U.S. at the time. I think this was in 2017 or 2018. This involved Jessica Yaniv, who was filing multiple, like a dozen or more complaints against waxing salons who refused to wax her genitalia, which was still male genitalia. And so we defended the waxing salons in that case. And in that case, we were arguing, not just in our court documents, but in our public columns about the case, in our speeches that our spokespeople would give on this case, that it was unjust to expect other people to affirm the chosen identity of another. And you know, we had written some great columns in those years about thinking about the idea of self-identity from a different perspective, and talking about people, the real cases, the actual cases that exist out there of people who are fully vision equipped, but identify as blind. There are some really interesting and bizarre, arguably, self-identification issues out there, and this and the gender identity and expression issue. In that context, just like we don't expect somebody to be required by law to affirm that a vision-equipped person is blind, we also don't expect somebody to be required by law to say that this person is male, or this person is female, or this person is something else. Even if you're a doctor, I'm not required by law to tell you that you're a doctor, to call you doctor. If you're a senator, I'm not required by law to call you senator. So I think we get confused with the gender identity and expression laws in thinking that people are required by law to affirm the gender identity of another. And in Canada, that has come to mean that people can be charged up to $10,000 in compensation because they refuse to affirm the identity of another.
We will get to the rest of this video in just 1 second, but before we do, what better gift idea that allows you to support my work and free speech while also having a robust glass of Malbec and a piping hot cup of coffee? First, check out Allison with 1lwinepromo.com. You get 50% off some of my favorite high altitude Malbecs from Argentina, and one even comes from the oldest vineyard in Argentina. Plus, you get 50% off shipping. They pair very well with the desserts you will be having with grandma while you debate all of the hottest topics around us right now. Or, speaking of hot, have a hot cup of coffee with twinenginecoffee.com/Allison, also with 1L Allison. These are high altitude shade grown USDA certified organic Nicaraguan roasts. The CEO and founder of the company lives right there in Nicaragua, where they grow, harvest, and roast the beans. There's also a Caturra tea. If you're a tea drinker, this is tea that you make out of the coffee fruits. You can have it hot or cold. I like to cold brew mine for 24 hours. Both options, the hot or cold, very good, as are the coffees, as is also the wine. So check out my sponsors and toast to free speech. Was this the issue that Jordan Peterson kind of rose to fame over?
No. Jordan Peterson rose to fame over his
he refused to
kind of
right to like being forced by the university, or maybe it was the laws in Canada to use a pronoun, yes. Not because he was against somebody saying, hey, I'm a this, that, or whatever, and he would say that he just didn't feel being compelled by the government to do that was right.
That's right. That's exactly right. Jordan Peterson at the University of Toronto, after they imposed these policies that were, I think, voluntary policies. They weren't being forced on professors, but they were expectations that were being laid out in light of the fact that the Ontario government had just moved ahead with these gender identity and expression parameters being added to the enumerated grounds of discrimination in the Human Rights Act of Ontario. And then Trudeau followed that years later by making that federal. But yes, Jordan Peterson initially rose to prominence over his principled stance against the compelled speech element of those laws in Ontario and the Universities of Toronto's attempts to enforce those laws. And so this was related. And Jordan Peterson wrote about this case involving the little girl that the Justice Center is now representing. He wrote in a few months before we announced that we were getting involved that what happened to this girl was wrong, that it's the end result of enshrining these gender identity affirmation laws into the Human Rights Act, and that it's problematic. But Peterson was very careful in his column about this case not to endorse the family's decision to use these gender identity affirmation laws and these human rights tribunals as a means to achieve justice. He was careful not to endorse that is a just reaction to what this school did. And there are plenty of other things that the school could do to rectify this situation. The teacher should be at least retrained, if not corrected in some way. or let go. Or maybe they need to rethink the curriculum and the way it's being taught and the kinds of videos that they're showing to 7-year-olds. So there's lots of ways that you can address what happened to this little girl without resorting to endorsing a law that you have been saying for years and years and years is unjust, and that you know in your heart is unjust. Because that's what I still believe to this day, is that my former colleagues at the Justice Center believe in their hearts that these laws are unjust, and yet they are still choosing to assert them in this human rights tribunal.
And you're saying that they just think you're just missing the point, or you're interpreting it incorrectly, because they're not seeing what you're seeing in this case. Like like when you talk to them about, hey guys, this seems to be hypocritical or just not on message for us, they're just looking at you like, what's wrong with Michael? Why doesn't he see this? They really just don't get it, or because it sounds like either it's that they just don't see it the way that you see it, or they do see it the way you see it, but it's like, in this case, we just have to, because desperate times call for desperate measures.
Yeah, it's hard to say one way or another. I can't get in their heads and know exactly what they were thinking when they took it on. I can't understand why they insisted on doing it anyway, when me and others were saying that this is going to force us out. So I really don't know. I know what they told me, which is that they believe this transgenderism issue is the most important issue of our time. They told me that they believe that it is on mission, despite all the evidence that I had to the contrary. So I think they just dug in their heels and didn't want to budge.
So what happens next with you?
So I am waiting for a date for the legal proceedings. It's been filed with the court, but the Canadian justice system, like the US justice system, is extremely slow. So I'm not expecting anything to happen anytime soon.
I know you have to be careful about what you say specifically about your case, but what is your argument against them that you have, like what did they do that you're taking legal action? Like what's the law, or can you say anything about that at all? Like why you didn't just walk away and say, all right, I'll just find another job? Why you decided to take legal action against them?
I think all I can say is that when I signed up for the Justice Center, I believe that they were, I was led to believe that they were standing for certain principles that I consider to be absolutely fundamental. That's why anybody chooses to go into the charitable advocacy sector rather than make private sector salaries, which are always much more competitive. They do it because they care about the cause, they care about the issues. And that was definitely my case coming out of university, wanting to dedicate my career to advancing these values of liberty and actual liberalism that I've believed from a very young age. And the Justice Center decided to change that mandate, making it impossible for me to contribute my time and my skills to that organization and to what they were doing.
What if they say to you, well, you believe in individual freedoms and a business's right or an organization's right to do as they please. We have our right to do this, and if you want to participate, then that's your right to go. But where's the wrongdoing, I guess? If you believe truly in an organization's individual right to do something and your individual right then to respond.
Right. That's a good question. And actually, it's a question that we had to grapple with in other contexts at the Justice Center, because one of the very first issues that we took on was the issue of campus free speech. And in Canada, we have the handicap that, unlike in the US, where the courts have ruled very clearly that the First Amendment applies on public university campuses, in Canada, we haven't had such a ruling. And so the charter right to free expression in Canada, how it extends to public universities has always been a legal gray area. And so that was very challenging for us, because when we were founded, campus free speech was our topic du jour. It was what transgenderism became like post 2015. Before 2015, our main issues were freedom of expression on campus, freedom of expression in general, and some freedom of religion cases. But campus free speech was our big ticket issue for many, many years. And we had this handicap where we couldn't actually argue that the charter was definitively going to be applied to the public university. And so we couldn't guarantee that a charter right to free expression would be recognized by the courts when there was a case of a student being censored on campus. But what we did look to was contract law. And in contract law, it's reasonable to expect that when you enter into an agreement with a body, so let's say in the context of a student or their parents entering into an agreement for their student to attend that university and to pay tuition in return for that and get a degree at the end of it. Part of that contract, the unstated or implied part of that contract, is all of the policies, all of the bylaws, all of the statements that the university has made about things like student behavior, the student code of conduct, and also things like academic freedom and freedom of expression. And even though the charter doesn't necessarily apply from the court's perspective to all public university cases, what is clear is that all public universities in Canada have some kind of stated commitment enshrined in their bylaws or in their policies or in their Senate acts, which very clearly and unequivocally state that free expression and academic freedom are fundamental values of the university. And so we argued at the Justice Center that if the charter didn't apply, then we could argue on contract law grounds that if a university had a policy in support of free expression which preempted the university from censoring based on, whether speech was uncomfortable or offensive or, anything less than hate speech, which is protected in Canada, then we could argue that those policies were part of the contract that the student and the parents signed when they agreed to attend that university. The Justice Center does a lot of good work, and I'm really proud of the 8 years that I spent there defending actual individual rights. And I would really like to see the Justice Center get back to its original mission and to redefine itself as the organization that it always was, because I think Canada, especially these days during these COVID lockdowns, we desperately need more charter defenders. We need more individual rights advocates, and the Justice Center is one of the few out there. But I think this is something that I want to say to our entire movement, because I think we have a problem in the movement right now where we're endorsing ends justify the means tactics in order to get results in the short term. And the problem with that, as people like Peterson would say, is that you're compromising on principle, and then what is it that you're winning in the end if you had to compromise on principle to get there? And that, I think, is the fundamental problem that the Justice Center is facing with this case. I think it's a problem that we're seeing time and time again in the libertarian conservative movement, and it's preventing us from making the kinds of inroads, and it's preventing us from changing hearts and minds the right way, which is the only way that we're actually going to get long-term change.
It's a really interesting case, and I appreciate your taking the time to explain it. And I should say, for people who may remember, not too long ago, I had John Carpe with the Justice Center on talking about the mandate. So they've been on the front lines really of pushing back on the COVID mandates in Canada. So it is really interesting to see how focus and perspective and just behind the scenes, the work they're doing, changes, I guess, and depending on the issue. And, of course, like you said, they have their own perspective on it. And I should just say, like, I haven't talked to them yet about it because I didn't even put two and two together that it was the same people that I had just had on. But I'll reach out to them and ask them. But I just think it's interesting because I do think you make a valid point when you talk about the ends justifying the means. And, I think in today's world, it's not just this kind of issue that you're talking about, but like COVID, or you see it play out where like people, it just feels like the world is kind of upside down. The folks who used to be skeptical, for instance, of pharmaceutical companies is now like, no, we have to trust them because the danger is that great. You can see how a wide variety of topics, if there's enough fear, enough concern about where we're headed with this, how easily people can change their view on freedom or skepticism, or hey, should we be careful about jumping in, I guess, on this narrative because of where it could essentially lead us. And I don't know if that's new. Maybe that's how things have always been, or maybe that's just everything feels like it's so amped up right now that there are issues that people really feel like if they don't shut down somebody's freedoms on this, then the danger is just it's just beyond great, and COVID is one of them. And I think, like we had issues with constitutional freedoms after 9/11. That was just like another, we have to increase surveillance. We have to do all these other things because it's in the name of safety. And then you have COVID, the same thing. We have to take away your rights because of safety. And then like in this case, same thing. And I think you bring up a valid point. So I don't know. We'll see what happens. I appreciate it, Michael. Thanks again for taking the time.